In July 1945, the USS Indianapolis, which was constructed in 1931, set off on an undercover, secret mission delivering parts of the first atomic bomb to the island of Tinian, where their fellow soldiers and the B-29 bombers were based. The USS Indianapolis was a Portland-class heavy cruiser which served as a flagship for years during World War II. It was the 30th of July when the ship sailing in the Philippines, carrying 1,197 men, were attacked without warning by the Japanese. One of the soldiers, Dean Cox, who was on duty at the time, recalled the moment when the first torpedo hit. Up in the air I went. There was water, debris, fire, everything just coming up, and we were 25 metres from the water line. It was a tremendous explosion. Then, about the time I got to my knees, another one hit. The torpedoes reportedly almost tore through the ship. The ship began to take on massive amounts of water, causing it to fall on its side and sink, which is when the orders came to abandon ship. The men began jumping into the water, and it took a total of 12 minutes for the entire ship to sink, which left 900 survivors alive in the water. Little did they know, their nightmare had only just begun. Life rafts were non-existent, and as the sun rose, the survivors searched the dead for their life jackets. They formed groups to keep afloat in the water, ranging from a small few to 300. All they could do was wait and pray to be rescued, which would prove to be difficult as the Indianapolis had no escorts and was all alone when it sank. Cox stated, "We figured that if we could just hold out for a couple of days, they'd pick us up." The soldiers waited and soon began to feel the effects of exposure and thirst, which is when things began to get worse. The explosion, the sinking of the ship, and the blood in the water drew animals to the wreckage. Among the many animals were sharks, hundreds of sharks. During the first night, the sharks only focused on the floating dead. Then, the sharks began to focus on the living, targeting the injured and bleeding. In a panic, the men began quarantining themselves from anyone with an open wound, and when someone died, they would push their bodies away in hopes that it would attract the sharks' attention. One of the men made the fatal mistake of opening a can of spam, which drew the sharks' attention, and before he had the chance to eat it, they swarmed around him and began to feast, which made the other soldiers get rid of all their meat rations. The sharks fed for days on the remaining soldiers, whilst all they could do was wait and pray that they weren't next. Others succumbed to heat and thirst. On day 4 at 11 AM, a Navy plane flew overhead and spotted the survivors. He immediately radioed for help, and when he saw the sharks attack, he disobeyed orders and landed his plane in the shark-infested waters to help the wounded. Later on that day, their rescue came as the USS Doyle arrived on the scene to help the survivors, in which only 317 of the crew remained. It was estimated that the sharks had feasted on over 150 of the men, and this disaster would go down as the worst shark attack in history. On the 20th of December 2018, the crew of the Indianapolis were collectively awarded a Congressional Gold Medal.